The narrative you are being sold is a missile defense shield. Lockheed Martin is quadrupling THAAD interceptor production. The media fixates on kinetic threats, objects you can see, track, and shoot down. This is a calculated distraction. While Washington debates a limited strike on Iran, adversaries have already made the calculation. Quoting a top advisor to Iran's supreme leader, any U.S. action will be met with a response that is immediate, all-out, and unprecedented. This is not a bluff. It is a protocol. It is the doctrine of asymmetric escalation. The primary vector of attack is not kinetic. It is silence. While you watch the sky for missiles, the real war is being prepared in the deep ocean and the vacuum of space. CSIS reports confirm over 95% of global data, including trillions in daily financial transactions, travels through a few hundred undersea fiber optic cables. This is the central nervous system of the global economy. It is fragile, unprotected, and the primary target in a systemic conflict. Cutting these cables or blinding critical satellites does not require a symmetric military. It requires denial. This protocol triggers the blind Leviathan scenario, a dominant military power rendered deaf and navigationally inert. An aircraft carrier strike group with no GPS is a billion-dollar liability. A Federal Reserve unable to clear transactions is the trigger for a systemic solvency crisis. The adversary's goal isn't to defeat the Leviathan. It is to sever its senses, turning its immense weight into the very instrument of its own collapse. The motive for systemic warfare is never ideology. It is solvency. When a nation-state faces a terminal domestic liability, it functions like a corporation on the verge of bankruptcy. Its only remaining asset is chaos. The balance sheet must be reset, even if it requires burning down the global ledger. Consider the vector of Russia. As NATO prepares for a potential conflict, CSIS analysis confirms the kinetic cost of the Ukraine war has created a severe domestic liability. An unpopular war drains state liquidity and political capital. This is not a political problem. It is a solvency crisis. Symmetric conflict is a direct vector to bankruptcy. Facing symmetric defeat and internal collapse, the protocol dictates an immediate pivot. Weakness forces the hand. A state cannot afford to match tank for tank when its treasury is empty. The mathematical certainty is that continuing a conventional conflict leads to asset liquidation. Therefore, the only logical action is to escalate the conflict to a domain where the dominant power has catastrophically more to lose. This is not a theory. It is the stated blueprint. When a top Iranian advisor declares that any limited strike by the U.S. will trigger an immediate, all-out, and unprecedented response, this is the solvency protocol being broadcast on an open channel. It's a launch-on-warning posture for systemic chaos. This asymmetric escalation targets the core architecture of American power. While Lockheed Martin quadruples THAAD missile interceptor production, a symmetric solution, a Harvard economist warns that the Federal Reserve's own crisis tools can be weaponized. The battlefield has expanded from kinetic exchanges to liquidity shocks. The calculus is cold. For the state facing insolvency, the cost of inaction, guaranteed internal collapse, is infinite. The risk of an asymmetric strike, while high, offers a non-zero chance of survival by resetting the global board. Your perceived strength is no longer a deterrent. It is the trigger. The entire blueprint for Western military dominance is now fiscally insolvent. The math is the kill shot. Analysts at RUSI have quantified the terminal liability. A $5 million main battle tank, the symbol of kinetic power, is systematically hunted and neutralized by a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a balanced exchange. It is an economic execution. The attrition ratio is no longer sustainable. This economic inversion is the engine of our thesis, asymmetric escalation. When the cost of offense is fractions of a percentage of the cost of defense, the weaker actor has a permanent, structural advantage. They are not incentivized to de-escalate. They are incentivized to spam low-cost threats until the dominant power faces a solvency crisis. Every expensive interceptor fired, like the THAAD missiles Lockheed Martin is now quadrupling production of, deepens the defender's financial wound. It's a forced bankruptcy via 1,000 cuts. This protocol is enabled by a new reality, the democratization of violence. Lethality is no longer the exclusive domain of state-level actors with trillion-dollar budgets. It has been decentralized. The capacity to cripple critical infrastructure, neutralize advanced hardware, and inflict systemic chaos is now available at the commercial level. This is the vector through which adversaries like Iran can credibly threaten an all-out and unprecedented response to any limited strike. They do not need to match a carrier group. They only need to deploy enough low-cost assets to make the conflict economically and therefore politically unwinnable. The primary battlefield is no longer a geographic location. It is a systemic condition. We call this the gray zone, a state of persistent, low-grade warfare where kinetic action is the final, almost irrelevant phase. The real war is fought in the staging. Examine the Persian Gulf. As Israeli and Saudi officials converge on Washington to game out strike options, Iran's protocol is explicit. A top advisor to the supreme leader stated any U.S. military action, quote, will be considered an act of war, and the response will be immediate, all-out, and unprecedented. This isn't a bluff. It's a statement of doctrine. The target of escalation is not the specific U.S. asset that launches the strike. It is, by their own admission, the heart of Tel Aviv. The goal is systemic shock, not symmetric attrition. The proof is in the reaction of allies. Saudi Arabia and the UAE barring the Pentagon from using their airspace for potential strikes is not a political realignment. It is a solvency decision. They understand that U.S. kinetic action on their soil transforms them from a partner into a primary target in an asymmetric escalation protocol. They are decoupling from the liability of conventional American dominance. This template is not isolated. According to Russian state-affiliated military analysis, NATO is seen as actively preparing for a continent-wide conflict. Simultaneously, Lockheed Martin is quadrupling production of THAAD missile interceptors. These are not first-strike weapons. This is a massive capital allocation based on the mathematical certainty of a retaliatory swarm. The defense industry is pricing in the enemy's doctrine, asymmetric, overwhelming, and aimed at high-value economic and civilian centers. The most critical gray zones, however, are the proxy laboratories. CSIS analysts note that regional instability in nodes like Southern Africa is not random chaos. It's a live-fire stress test of the Western system. These zones are used to probe vulnerabilities, mapping how critical mineral supply chains fracture, how quickly social cohesion can be degraded, and how financial contagion spreads through a secondary market. They are the non-kinetic reconnaissance missions, gathering the targeting data for a future systemic shock. The nuclear command structure operates on a fixed-time protocol, launch on warning. This doctrine dictates that a retaliatory strike is initiated upon detection of an inbound enemy launch before the incoming warheads detonate. This is not a strategy of patience. It is a mathematical calculation from a bygone era, now representing a catastrophic systemic liability. This protocol is the explicit target. Adversaries understand they cannot survive a symmetric kinetic exchange. Instead, they weaponize our own procedures. Iran has publicly stated that any U.S. military action at any level will be met with an immediate, all-out, and unprecedented response. According to Axios, this message was delivered as Israeli and Saudi officials converged on Washington to discuss strike options. This is not a bluff. It is the stated activation of an asymmetric escalation protocol. The primary vector is not a missile. It is a cyber attack that creates the fog of digital war. By blinding early warning radar and satellite feeds, an adversary presents the commander with a zero-sum choice under an impossible deadline. Is the signal loss a technical malfunction, or is it a deliberate blackout masking an incoming salvo? Waiting for confirmation means risking total decapitation. Launching means initiating a global thermonuclear exchange based on what could be phantom data. This is the blueprint for turning strength into a trigger for collapse. While defense contractors like Lockheed Martin quadruple THAAD missile interceptor production, as reported by Stars and Stripes, the adversary bypasses the shield entirely and attacks the nervous system. The doctrine forces the launch. The fear guarantees the escalation. The weaker actor's only logical move is to force the stronger power's cost-benefit analysis to break down, guaranteeing a system-shattering outcome. This is the new mathematical certainty of warfare. While defense contractors quadruple production of missile interceptors, and officials from Israel and Saudi Arabia converge on Washington to authorize kinetic action, the protocol has already shifted. They are planning for the last war. The assumption that a limited strike remains limited is the primary accelerant of systemic collapse. The adversary's response is not a variable. It is a mathematical certainty. An Iranian official states publicly, any military action will be met with an immediate, all-out, and unprecedented response. The key word is not all out. It is unprecedented. This is the doctrine of asymmetric escalation. You fire a missile, they trigger a solvency crisis. The battlefield is no longer geographic. It is systemic. While analysts at RUSI and CSIS track NATO preparations for a potential war with Russia, the real vector of attack is the financial architecture itself. As a Harvard economist warns, the very crisis tools built by the Fed can be weaponized to trigger collapse. The calibration forecast for the next 12 months, a synchronized, attribution impossible blackout targeting a primary U.S. container port and a Tier 1 data center hub. The event will be framed as infrastructure failure. The economic cost will be calculated in the billions per day. The signal sent will be incalculable. It is the launch on warning protocol for the 21st century, demonstrating the capability to sever physical and digital supply chains in a single, deniable act. This is not a test of defenses. It is a calibration of our response to systemic paralysis.